Hey, you might understand the theory behind CAGED, or partly understand it, but how can you use it in your playing? What if you want to play a song and use CAGED to play that song? And another thing that many videos don't talk about, what if there's a minor chord in that progression you're trying to play? In this video, I want to give you a brief overview of CAGED if you yet don't understand it. You can skip to that part of the video if you already understand how CAGED works. I want to show you how to use CAGED to play any chord, how to fret and use some of those CAGED shapes in real playing so you can do it too. And lastly, how to apply CAGED to minor chords, something not commonly discussed, and I think it really confuses people. So feel free to grab your guitar if you have it handy and pause the video in any spot so you can do it too. If you don't know me yet, my name is Dan Lopez, best-selling author of this book over here, where we discover everything about chords and how to fret them, how to use them all across the fretboard, CAGED included. All right, let's get started. First, if you really don't understand CAGED, I want to bring you up to speed. Again, you can skip this part of the video if you know how it works, but the key here is understand that any one of those open chord shapes you learned the first day can be moved across the fretboard to play other chords. So let me show you with A, for example. That's an A chord shape. Some people fret it like this, some people fret it like that. However you want to fret it, strings 2, 3, and 4 are fretted on the 2nd fret, right? Well, in that A, the 5th string is an A note. That makes sense, right? A note, A chord. Okay, so what happens to that note on the 5th string open if I move it here, for example, 2nd fret? That's going to become a B note, right? We can all agree on that. A, B. All right. So what happens, what do you think will happen if instead of moving that just one single note, we move all the notes that create that A chord? If one note becomes another note, one chord shape, if I move all the notes, is going to become another chord. You got it right. In fact, it's going to become all the other chords. So A note becomes B note, A chord shape. If I move all the notes that create that A chord shape, including the ones left open with my index finger, I'm going to fret them. It's going to become a B chord. If we follow the alphabet, it's going to become a C chord, and then a D chord, just following the alphabet, right? And then an E chord, and then an F chord, and then a G chord, and beyond the 12th fret is going to become an A chord again. And you can do this with any of the chord shapes you already know. So for example, let's use a C shape, for example, right? I'm going to use that C shape. I'm going to fret it like this because now I free up my index finger to fret those 2 notes on the 1st and 3rd string left open. And now a C, if I follow the alphabet, is going to become what? A D, right? And then it's going to become an E, and then an F, and then a G, and so on. So if we look at our musical alphabet, which is the same as the normal alphabet, there's 7 letters, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Of those 7 letters, there's only 5 of them that have open chord shapes. If you realize the common way to play an F is using an E shape, right? So instead of fretting it like this, I fret it like this, so I can place my index finger behind and move those 1st, 2nd, and 6th strings, those notes on those strings, and follow the chord shape. That's an F. It's also going to become an G, and then an A, and then a B, and all the letters of the alphabet. The common way to play B is using an A shape. So if I move that B 2 frets down, it becomes an A. If I move it 2 frets up, it's going to become a B. There's only 5 chord shapes that you can move across the entire fretboard to play all chords. And they're your A, C, D, E, and G shapes. If we rearrange those names, they spell CAGED. And why do they spell CAGED? Well, CAGED is giving you the sequence of shapes, not of chords, of shapes that you can use to play the same chord. Let's do it with C because it's the first shape in CAGED, right? So you've got C over here, and the next chord shape that you can use to play a C chord is going to be an A shape following CAGED. So I'm going to get an A shape, Index finger behind that chord shape, B, C. So now we found two ways to play a C chord. We first used the C shape, open position, and then we used an A shape, moved over to the 3rd fret. So when we follow CAGED, what is going to be the next shape that we can use to play a C chord? We're using a shape, a different shape to play a C chord. It's going to be G. So I'm going to move a G to an A, to a B, to a C. That's a C chord, but it's using a G shape. Following CAGED, what's the next shape? An E shape, right? So I'm going to get an E, index finger behind that shape, F, G, A, B, C. And the last shape, using CAGED to play a C chord, remember we're using a shape to play a chord, is a D shape. Okay, so I'm going to place my index behind that so I can fret that 4th string, and we've got a D, an E, an F, a G, an A, B, and a C. We found 5 ways using CAGED to play a C chord. A C shape, an A shape, a G shape, an E shape, and a D shape. But what happens if you want to play a G chord, for example, all across the neck, using CAGED? It doesn't start with a C, so what do we have to do? First, we got to find a shape we already know to play G. So if we're playing G, the most logical thing is to use a G shape, right? What letter is that from CAGED? G. What is the next shape we're going to use to play G? Remember, we're using a different shape now, moved across the fretboard to play a G chord. Well, if we follow CAGED, it's going to be an E shape. I'm going to get an E shape, index finger behind that shape, and I'm going to move it F, G. So now we found 2 ways to play G, right? A G shape and an E shape. Following CAGED, what is the next shape that we're going to use to play a G chord? It's going to be a D shape. So I'm going to fret it like that, so I can fret my 4th string 2 with my index, D, E, F, G. Now I found 3 ways to play a G chord. Following CAGED, what is the next shape that we can use to play a G chord? Well, CAGED ended, so we start right in the beginning again. So I'm going to fret C like this till I find G. I'm going to move it across the fretboard. C, D, E, F, G. That's a G chord, but it's using a C shape. And the last shape that we can use to play a G chord across the fretboard using CAGED is an A shape, if we follow the CAGED sequence. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now we found 5 ways to play G using CAGED. But I understand maybe a G shape moved across the fretboard is not a very practical thing to do, right? But the cool thing is that you can break those shapes down, which means you don't have to play all strings, which means that they're a lot easier to fret. Let me explain. Let's use a chord progression, for example, G, D, A, map out CAGED. What are the 5 shapes we can use? Where are they located on the fretboard? And then we'll break up those shapes into smaller chunks to see what we can do with CAGED. Okay, so the first chord in the progression is G. Obviously, I'm going to use a G shape to start with. Then I'm going to use an E shape. Then I'm going to use a D shape. Then I'm going to use a C shape. And then I'm going to use an A shape. Those are my 5 ways to play a G chord. The next chord in the progression is D. Obviously, I'm going to start with a D chord shape, open, right? That's easy. The next shape we're going to use is C. Remember, CAGED ended, but we start in the beginning. So C, the next shape is an A shape, following CAGED. The next shape is a G shape, following CAGED. The next shape is an E shape, following CAGED, and then it would go back to D over the 12th fret. So now we found the 5 chord shapes we can use to play D all across the fretboard. And the last chord we're playing in this progression is A. Logical that we start with an A shape. If we follow CAGED, the next shape is going to be G, and the next shape is going to be E, and the next shape is going to be D, and the last shape we have to play A is C. Again, 5 ways to play an A chord using different shapes and following CAGED. So let's talk about simpler ways to play those chord shapes across the fretboard. Let's start with the first chord with this G, open position. The important thing to understand is that basic major or minor chords are created only with 3 notes. Yes, you're playing through 6 strings. That means that some notes have to be repeated. Instead of giving you like what note creates every chord, which I think is a little bit complex, I'm just gonna color the notes inside of the chord so you can see what notes are used. Okay, we've got a red, we've got a blue, and we've got a green. 3 notes. That's why it's called a triad. More on that later. Okay, so if you play any combination of those 3 notes, you'll be playing that chord. No matter if you're playing 3 strings, triad, if you're playing 4 strings, 5 strings, or 6 strings. You can break those shapes up if you know what colors you're playing. So for example, for a G shape, I could just choose to play strings 1, 2, 3, and 4. That includes the 3 colors, right? I could also choose to play just strings 2, 3, and 4. That also includes the 3 colors. Now, here's what's important. We used 5 chord shapes to play the same chord, in this case a G chord, right? But because it's always a G chord, it's always going to be the same notes spread across the fretboard. Those notes don't change. Even though the shape changes, the notes that create that chord are still the same. So if I map out, for example, the second shape we discovered, which is E, for that G chord, it still has red, blue, and green. So of that E chord shape that I have red, blue, and green, what are my possibilities? I could play, for example, strings 1, 2, and 3. A triad, I can play strings 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 3, 4, and 5. All those possibilities are G chords using an E shape. Using colors, I can easily choose what strings to play and what strings not to play. Remember, as long as you're using the 3 colors, you're playing that chord. Let's take a look at the second chord we're playing in this progression, which is D. D uses 4 strings, normally played, right? And it also includes a red, a blue, and a green of that chord. I've got another video explaining where those notes come from the major scale. If you want to watch it, it's right there, right? But let's just keep things simple and know that that's a D note, that's a red, we've got another D note, and then we've got a blue and a green, okay? Now, if we follow CAGED, the next shape is a C shape. But because it's still a D chord, it's gonna have the same colors. So if we look at those colors, I could choose to play strings 1, 2, and 3, 2, 3, and 4, 3, 4, and 5, or a combination of any of those packed together. As long as I have my 3 colors, I'm good to go. Same happens with A. That's an A chord, still has 3 colors, right? Where your red is the one that defines the name of the chord, that's an A note. It still has a green and a blue. My next shape is a G shape. Because it's an A chord, it's gonna have the same 3 colors, again, only in different spots of the neck, right? So I could choose to play, I don't know, strings 1, 2, 3, and 4. For example, that's a pretty easy shape to play. Or I could choose to play strings 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's a pretty easy shape to play too. It's a broken down G shape. So let's see what we can do and come up with inside that chord progression. Grab your guitar and feel free to pause the video if you want to see what are the possibilities of CAGED. Okay, so I'm gonna skip the open position because you probably know how to play that. So I'm gonna skip to the second position, right? So for G, I found an E shape. Let's lock that E shape down and keep it there. Now for D, my next position is C. So looking at those 2 combinations, what can I do? I can fret, for example, that E full bar, or I could fret it like this, and then move to D like that. Check it out. Very economical, right? Pretty simple movement that allows me to be very economical in my playing. Now, if I move to the last chord, which is A, the next shape we were doing was G. Now, if I look at all three chords, check this out. I can use the same shape I was using here, which is an E shape, broken down, then a C shape broken down, and then I can choose this part of a G shape to play that A chord. Check out how little my fingers move and how good it sounds. Sounds pretty cool, right? And we're using CAGED. We're not playing the full G shape, which is a pain. We're just using parts of every chord, making sure it includes the red, the blue, and the green. Let's play that chord progression again, but one step further in CAGED. So G was my first chord. I started with a G shape, then an E shape. So now I gotta play a D shape. So the easiest way to use a D shape is just playing the three thinnest strings. That's a little triad right there. Tri meaning three colors, three notes, tri. Pretty cool, right? And then I'm gonna jump to my second chord, which was D. So of course you could go perfectly ballad, right? But we're trying to move up the fretboard. So we already discussed D shape, C shape, A shape right here. So what can we do with that A shape? Okay, so I've got D right here. What if I fret it with 2 fingers instead of 3 fingers? And then just move to A right here. Check out how easy that is. You could also go like this. That's also a broken down A shape. And the last chord we're playing is A. We already discussed the G shape, so the next shape is an E shape. Again, I could play this, or I could play this, or I could play this. Let's see what's more economical or what we like. We started with this little triad for G, then we moved to this little triad for D, and now we're looking for a combination for A. So I think this one is pretty cool. Check it out. I'm gonna play it how I told you. Pretty economical too, right? I'm using CAGED for every one of those chords, and because I know my colors now and where they lie, I can choose what I think is gonna be more economical for my playing or what sounds better. I mean, you get to choose because now you have the option. Okay, so what happens then if we encounter a chord progression or a song that uses a minor chord? I think nobody talks about this, and it's very important because most songs we love use minor chords. Okay, so let's talk about the difference between a major chord and a minor chord. I already told you that basic major and minor chords only use 3 notes. So what's the difference between them? Let's look at an A shape. I think it's the easiest one to understand. In that A shape, we've got 3 colors. The blue note is the one responsible for creating either a major chord or a minor chord. Check it out. So I'm gonna move that note of that A major chord shape, and I'm gonna move it 1 fret lower. See how it changed? Major, happy. Minor, sad. That's the only difference between a major chord and a minor chord, the blue note. So if we had that chord progression we started originally, and we said instead of D, G, A, we were gonna play G, G, A minor, what would have to happen to that blue note in that A chord to create an A minor chord? It would have to move 1 fret lower, correct? But because now we mapped out using CAGED the entire fretboard for A, if we want to map out the entire fretboard for A minor, we're going to move all blue notes. All blue notes move at the same time because they're the same note. They're the note that create a minor chord. We minorized that note 1 fret lower in pitch. So check it out. Now we have all the notes that create an A minor chord. And if we follow CAGED, the first shape is A, in this case A minor, and the second shape was G. But G has 2 blue notes. So in order to create a minor version of that shape, you need to move the 2 blue notes at the same time, which are here and here. And you have to move them at the same time. And that shape is going to be impossible to fret. But if you break it down into smaller chunks, it's easy to do. For example, you could play this. Or you could play this. And of course, you could play this too. If we keep on moving with CAGED, the next shape was E, but that's a major. We move the blue note 1 fret lower, that's a minor version of that shape, giving us an A minor chord. And of course, you could choose maybe strings 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, or a combination of both of them, or maybe just 3, 4, 5. It all depends on the sound you're looking for, but now you know that you have possibilities to choose from without having to play all 6 strings. Hopefully this video has given you a wider understanding on CAGED and what are the possibilities to play around with. If you've liked it, please subscribe. It really helps me grow the channel and keep doing videos like these. And if you want to know more about this, check out the Ultimate Guitarist Chordbook. The link is going to be down there. Let me show you the chapter on CAGED. You know what? Let me show you the entire book. Okay, so here we have it, the Ultimate Guitarist Chordbook. This book could also be a great gift if you know someone who knows how to play the guitar, because it starts right from the beginning. So how to read chord charts and the difference between chords versus shapes we discussed, and the basic chord shapes. Here's like where to start, the basic chord shapes. Also, how to transform those shapes into minor shapes, which is the first step. How to fret those shapes, how to switch through those shapes with videos and scan codes. And then finger stretching exercise. Let's see what else we've got. So how to start transforming those shapes from CAGED into other chords like A7, like 7 chords, major 7 chords, just by moving a couple notes, which is really cool. Now, if you know that shape for CAGED, you can start creating major 7 CAGED shapes. So really cool. It also has more beginner-oriented, easy chord progressions that you can apply right now if you're struggling to change through chords. How to play bar chords successfully, right? What they are, how they move. Check out how they move across the fretboard. Let's see what else, sharps and flats. So everything's included here, right? An easy bar chord checklist. Let's get into the nitty gritty. CAGED, how it works, what we were discussing right now. All C chords across the fretboard, right? How it works. We've got triads, see the colors? Super easy to know your triads if you know your colors, which are the CAGED shapes. C, A, G, E, D. Okay, then the minor shapes. Okay, now all chord theory. So understanding theory and how chords are created. Here's where the red, blue, green notes come from. So you're going to be able to, with those CAGED shapes, play majors, minors, sus chords, 5 chords, 7 chords, major 7, 6 chords, augmented, diminished, at 9, all chords using CAGED, using that simple formula. How to combine everything. See, here's CAGED, but playing an A minor 6. Pretty cool. Anyway, what else do we have here? Some common questions. Chord progressions by genre. So what does singer-songwriter or folk use to get their sound? Pop, rock, blues, hard rock, reggae. Chord progression theory, how the circle of fifth works. Everyone tries to overcomplicate this, but it's so simple. Anyway, how to create your own chord progressions, minor chord progressions. What else do we have here? And here's really cool. So chord library, how chord charts work again, and how to fret every single one of your chords. So we've got bar chords, we've got triads. For every one of the CAGED shapes, you've got open chords, you've got bar chords, you've got triads. For everyone, see the G shape, the G, the E shape. So for every one of those chords. So I think it's a really, really cool book to have. I think it'll really help you in your journey, or anyone you know who's struggling to play the guitar. This might be the perfect gift for them. Go and check it out. The link is going to be somewhere in the description.